Large cappuccino. Orders up.
And welcome back to Mental Breakdown. You may be wondering that we have a new guest for us today on Mental Breakdown.
Yay.
With Coach Francis joining the pod.
Yeah,
podcast.
Excited to be here.
Yes.
My first mental breakdown.
Yeah, but is it though? Yes, right. And just to recap, Mental Breakdown, do you know how to explain it? Do you want to explain it?
Yeah, sure. Mental breakdown is where we take some of the biggest professional or collegiate sports, or just biggest.
This time collegiate.
Yeah, biggest sport events, I guess, and we kind of walk through the highlights, the big moments, and approach it from a mental performance standpoint of kind of what's going on, what might be going on behind the scenes with some athletes mentally, and yeah, kind of talk through the highlights of the big sporting events.
Yeah, we'll pull up the highlight, we'll pull up the tape, and we will break it down from our perspective, the mental performance standpoint. And this time, for the first time in Mental Breakdown history, we will be breaking down collegiate sports and the March Madness of basketball tournaments for men and women's. Also a first.
Yeah.
I believe for us on Mental Breakdown is why we have Coach Francis. We'll be breaking down not only the men's national championship game between Houston and Florida, but also, and up first, because ladies first, the national championship game between UConn and defending champion South Carolina.
Yes, pretty exciting. And before we hop into it, how were your March Madness brackets? How did you do with that?
Yeah. No, I had UConn actually winning the women's bracket. So spoiler alert, I got it right. And men's I got wrong.
Yep.
Duke.
Me too.
I think we both picked Duke.
Yeah. I did have a feeling that UConn was going to get it for the women this year, just with everything that was kind of happening like last year with Caitlin Clark and Angel and Paige. I really wanted it to kind of happen for Paige and UConn. I don't know, just my personal thoughts. But yeah, on the men's side, I got it wrong though. But
yeah, because you love sports.
Yep.
You know all about
watch them all the
college
time.
basketball. Oh, yes. Mm-hmm.
So.
But first up, UConn, 11-time champion UConn Huskies. The title drought, 9 years. The last time they won was 2016.
Dang.
South Carolina, the defending national champions, and have won. If they win this one, if they win today in this game, they would have won 3 and 4 years, what we call dynasty in sports. But kind of take a notice at all the kind of, turn that down, but the pregame warm-up, right? This is your time to kind of get everything in your headspace kind of correct. So I always like to think, hopefully you're not winning or losing anything in the warm-up, right? Hopefully everything's just healthy. It's just there to get loose. And like we do with most things on Mental Breakdown, Coach Francis, we always start with the kickoff, the tip-off. So here it is. Whoever wins the tip-off wins 87%. No, imagine if that was an actual risk. That'd be crazy.
Yeah, that'd be crazy.
UConn wins the opening tip. And, this is where you kind of want to get your good players going early. So tough. Both teams are known, nationally to be two of the best defenses in the country. So South Carolina kind of strikes first here. And the beginning is all just a very back and forth game. Kind of hit the 3 there.
Yep.
Tahina Pow for 3 as things open up. So we're going to do Mental Breakdown a little bit differently. We're going to kind of talk while we go through these highlights a little bit while they play. I know normally we pause and break them down.
Yeah.
But there's a lot of clips on a basketball highlight reel.
Sure.
Just kind of talking through these things, the back and forth of basketball, the fast paced, right? This is what this sport compared to some of the other ones we've broken down with the Super Bowl, with, breaking down the Wimbledon final, with breaking down the World Series, right? This is more constant action and play.
Right.
So it's a lot more just to really just reset and always try to find, your space, your shot, because there's not many timeouts and not many pauses. So I don't know how many your experience working with basketball athletes, what you kind of maybe tell them in these moments, in these games.
Yeah, I think kind of a universal experience like starting any basketball game, it's like you want to get comfortable as quick as possible. Like just set the pace, start putting up points, and in this kind of back and forth in the first couple minutes, it's like you can definitely see like these teams are trying to like get into their groove and kind of like just start feeling comfortable with the game. And so a lot of times like all of those warm up nerves or pregame nerves are really kind of shaken out in those first couple minutes as points start going up and as you kind of get into that moment.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah, it's very good to be routine focused. I always like to say with the basketball players, athletes that I work with, you need to have that. You have your warm up, you know what you want to get done, even all the way up to the professional level. You see these guys, they have a very strict time piece to their warm ups usually. In this sport too, with basketball, I always tell my athletes, you got to focus and concentrate. And especially here, as we kind of see this moment, AZ Fudd with the focus and concentration, right? Taking, absorbing the contact, eyes on the hoop the whole time. She's not looking down. She's not getting upset. She's focused, right? Locked in, and really just trying to get the bat. Like that's a big thing, right? You have to focus no matter what you're doing in this kind of sport, and just have this constant eye scanning movement. So your UConn starts to open it up maybe a little bit, but a good back and forth throughout the whole kind of first half. But the steal there, gotta get.
Gotta get it.
Gotta protect the ball.
Exciting, yeah.
Gotta protect the ball. This is one of the important things. Turnovers make all the difference. You're losing possessions for your team, right? So UConn starts to open up. I believe they lead 19-14 at the end of this. So another little spoiler here as they kind of get going. And that's how the first quarter kind of ends there. Cool thing with I think women's college basketball, I'm not too sure on the men's side, but the running clock, right? So after she just made that bucket, the clock's still running, even though usually that possession kind of stops. So.
Oh, okay. Is it?
That's how it works. Yeah, it makes it challenging, right?
Because like with women and men's,
I believe it's different with men's and women's, yes. And then that's what makes it so much more challenging right there for South Carolina to try to get like a final possession off, because like after she scores that bucket, it's 5.4 and then it's still running. Usually bucket scored and then it stopped and then they have a chance maybe, but kind of a big thing, right? And especially in this sport, and you hear it all the time from the coaches when I talk to the players that I work with, they talk through, these final like minutes, like what do they want to do in terms of, maintaining, keeping possession. And that's why it's important to call these timeouts. It's important to, know that as a player mentally, like what do you need to do? When can you call a timeout? Because eventually too, you lose timeouts if you don't call them within a certain amount of time. So knowing that you have those, super important. But as we see here, Paige Beckers bringing the ball up, start of the second quarter. UConn up 5, now UConn up 7. And is this where they're going to start to pull away from South Carolina? Right? And finally get title number 12.
Yeah, this is kind of where things start getting in the nitty gritty of it, right? Like this is where, second quarter. So you're in the game now. All of those like nerves are kind of shaken out. Things are getting started, and you start seeing kind of like that pull away of who's leading and who's behind, right? And it's kind of just like that middle part of the game is really important to, as you said, like maintain your focus, maintain that drive, maintain that energy, regardless of what the scoreboard looks like. You're still in the first half of the game. Like you need to kind of keep that energy up and keep it going. And yeah. Yeah.
One of the big differences between college basketball and the NBA is for the NBA, in men's college basketball, NBA, you're playing 48 minutes. You play 12 4-minute quarters. College basketball, it's 40 minutes, but 2 20-minute halves. Women's basketball and then the WNBA, they do it the exact same, which is really awesome. It's 4 10-minute quarters, right? And that was a change that they made a few years ago. But to your point, these teams, maybe have a little bit of jitters, but they've all been here in these big moments for so long. These are two of the most consistent programs in women's college basketball. So these players are very used to these pressure and high stakes moments. And this is where in basketball, as you hear also a lot from coaches and the players, like it's all about runs. And can you go on a run? And just here, UConn's on an 8-0 run and has held South Carolina scoreless for almost 4.5 minutes. Yeah. They need to finally get going. Can they? And freshman Sarah Strong blocks the ball to keep this lead, keep this possession over Raven Johnson. And it's just, this is where, UConn finally has their full complement of players fully healthy. That is something that is tough to do, right? Injury prevention, keeping each other kind of strong, developing other parts of their game. That's what these players have done, because you have Paige Beckers, who was a number one recruit, Azzi Fudd, who was a number one recruit, Sarah Strong, who was the number one recruit this past class. So you have
Star-studded.
star power.
Yeah.
South Carolina, tons of star power also. Defending champions. Can they get it going, though? They are struggling to kind of find offense, but this is where UConn just attacking the basket and just controlling the game, controlling the pace, controlling the flow.
Sure.
And as we kind of get to the end of the second quarter, this is where, right, running clock the whole time.
Yeah.
Trying to figure out keeping your possession, keeping your dribble, and big play right here for UConn to go up 6. Can they get a final shot off for South Carolina? It's not a pretty one, and only 1.4 to do something, and not a ton of time. So UConn goes up 10 at the break, right?
Yeah.
And this is where, I don't know what you used to do. And I know it's tough because the sports we didn't really have half times. But for the athletes you do work with that have half times, what do you tell them to how they should approach that break?
Yeah, I think I would almost an example of UConn and South Carolina. I'd almost approach halftime differently depending on where you're at in the game. Are you up? Cool. You kind of want to keep that confidence, keep that momentum going. You want to kind of break down what might not be working and just kind of have those as tasks going into second half of okay, we got to keep this, and we got to fix this a little bit. But with South Carolina, I think a lot of that has to that halftime has to be reassurance and kind of finding a calm within the storm of hey, yeah, we're not where we want to be, but what are the good things, what are the bad things, and what are we trying to fix going into second half, but really kind of approach it from a reassurance and not get too anxious or not get too worried at halftime if you're not exactly where you want to be, right? Because on one side somebody's confident, on the other side somebody might be getting a little worried and anxious, and so kind of approaching those two self-talk patterns a little bit differently.
Yeah, no, really good point. These two coaches, Gino Auriemma for UConn, knows how to talk to his players. He's probably one of the most fascinating people to listen to across all sports, I think, personally. And right, you have here Holly Rowe interviewing Azzi Fudd right before the half, kind of getting into it, talking through, trying to find your spots going offensively, but talking about, what the game plan was, talking about, like you said, they're not getting ahead of themselves, but just really just trying to play within what their brand and identity is.
Right.
And then for South Carolina, how can they get back to their kind of brand, their identity of basketball? Because it's clearly not happening at the moment. But in all these March Madness tournament games for UConn, the second half is where they pulled away. If anything, they play slower in the first half. Right. And then this is where Fudd takes over and starts driving, starts earning it, and UConn just opening up this lead more and more, up 15 going in.
Right.
And just constant focus, constant scanning. It's something that you can work on as an athlete in, sports like soccer, sports like basketball, where you kind of need sports like lacrosse, where you need to be looking around the whole time, right?
Yeah.
Are there switches? Are there screens being set? You have to communicate. You have to have good positioning. You have to make sure you're not fouling with your hands, right? There's so many things to remember as a basketball athlete. And as we kind of talk and continue through this, the lead's still 15, still fighting in this third quarter. And, if you're South Carolina, hopefully right there, right, you can start to figure out a way to close this gap.
Right. Yeah.
But
and I think this is also a really important moment, not just for the ladies on the court, but also for people sitting on the bench too. Your teammates who are out there need that support in these kind of moments, and building the pressure and building the momentum to come back from that loss.
Yeah.
So
bench energy, as I've heard multiple times with some of these teams that I worked with. Some people feel like their position might not be starter. They call themselves left bench, but it's important, right? And you can see right here, like to your point, Francis, all these players on the bench trying to get their teammates back into it.
Yeah.
And South Carolina will roll with 10, 11 deep throughout this entire game, where UConn will keep a shorter 7, 8 person rotation.
Yeah.
And they'll go. If you're not producing and performing, this is always a, to any athlete that you feel like you're not getting your time or minutes, right? You have to make the most when you do get called, because you might, right? They're struggling to score offense and they're trying to find it from anyone, anywhere.
Yeah.
So you see Malaysia Fulwiley passing the ball there to get the assist, but UConn just relentless and just a lot of star power out there on the court and just dialing up good plays after timeouts, right? I think that's a really big thing in this sport is, how can you make sure when you're on their timeout to relax yourself, keep the intensity level, and get that simple instruction. But a lot of things going into games, right? Because there's so many things to focus on as a basketball player, offensively, defensively, because they both just happen so quickly, is making sure that you really have goals set for yourself in terms of what you need to remember from all aspects of the game, right? So like, what am I looking to do shooting wise? What do I need to do rebounding wise? What do I need to do kind of passing wise? Defensively, what do I need to do? And remembering those just big key words or key phrases, that's going to be much more helpful in these moments, right? And that's where maybe the game is getting away a little bit from South Carolina, because there's a lot of things going on. You have to try to obviously stop, these 3 number 1 recruits that are finally all healthy and playing together and playing through each other, but trying to figure out how you can kind of work through these things. And as we see once again, the bench energy this time from the UConn, Connecticut Huskies bench.
Yeah, but no, that's a good important point too. Like on both sides, whether you're on the lead side or if you're behind, with basketball, there's so many things to think about and so many things that you could focus on. And a lot of times when teams kind of start falling back, it's like, oh, I need to do 100 different things to fix it. And I got to do this and this and this. And you start to overwhelm yourself and you start to overthink all of the pieces that you're doing. So having those short reminders, those short objectives or cues to kind of keep you on a consistent mental state of I'm working on this and this. There's a lot going on, and yes, there's a lot to pay attention to and to focus on, but having those goals for yourself, like short, sweet, simple, that and consistent, really.
Yeah. And a lot of times when I talk with the basketball athletes that I work with, it's, my shot's not there, I need to, shoot, I need to see it go in. There's so many other ways, and you hear it all the time, should start on the defensive end, right? Your defense should lead to your offense. Yeah. Do you need to, set a hard screen, try to take a charge, really try to put yourself in there and try to get, yourself going in a way. Mm-hmm. But as we see here, we are 18 left, and UConn is just opening up this lead big time. Yeah. And once again, just amazing focus and concentration. That's one of the biggest things, I think, within this sport, more so because it is constant flow, constant movement around, right? It's just this focus and just concentration, right? Being able to also put your body on the line a little bit. Knowing that going in is it's a physical thing, putting your body out there, but mentally you have to know to do that, right? Driving in there, getting a foul and landing correctly. But, UConn's feeling it, smiles are happening, but South Carolina's not going to go away, right? They are a great program. They're going to continue to drive and kind of fight through this deficit. So
and I mean, that's what you want to see at this level. That's what even from a coach standpoint, that's ideally how you want to see your players keep going, fight all the way to the finish. It's not over till it's over, right? But staying strong, staying consistent all the way through till the end. Shows a lot of mental resilience with that too, of knowing that you're down 30 points here with 5 minutes left.
Being strong and resilient. Sarah Strong hits the 3 there to send up UConn up 30, but yes, right.
But yeah, I mean, from South Carolina's standpoint, it's like you don't want to be that team that loses it in this moment, right? Whether you win or lose at the end, you still want to finish strong with your performancing.
There's a big difference between losing by 30 and losing by, 15. There's a big difference, as we saw in the Super Bowl when the Eagles went up. And we talked about that earlier this year when the Eagles went up 34-0, right?
Yeah.
There's a big difference between eventually just cutting that to 40-22, right?
Right.
One, make it look a little bit more respectable maybe for the history books, but two, to kind of carry this stuff over for next season. And especially in college basketball, I mean, we could probably spend hours and episodes talking through the college landscape, the transfer
Yeah.
portal, recruiting. These are all big things that, this is their identity, right? South Carolina is not going to try to just go and fade away. They will continue to kind of hound you, push the ball, right? They're still
Yep.
face guarding. They're still picking you up at full court, half court there.
Yep.
And right, there's still UConn still going and hustling and driving too. And then eventually, the better moments in games, I always like to think as we go further along here, is when they finally pull the starters and kind of let those people on the end of the bench, right, get their moment, earn their moment, and kind of
Yep.
get to play in a national championship. Now, that's what every kid has dreamed
Sure.
of, right?
Yeah.
That
Yeah.
motivation growing up is every kid wants to do it. As you see here, they're going to start pulling the starters. Sarah Strong, who's had a great freshman year, she'll probably she'll be around for a while. And then the emotional
Paige. Yep.
goodbye between Gino Auriemma and Paige Beckers.
Yeah.
Right. And the emotions are finally flowing. Right. And this is the
Right.
thing. I feel like when you're competing, you're teetering on that edge, depending on, that emotional regulation piece of things. Right. Some athletes need to just be really calm, cool, collected. Other ones are super hyped up, worked up. Some people are somewhere in the middle. And you see here, right, Paige just teetering on that edge, super
Right.
emotional, which is great to show, great to see that she cares. She finally has earned this national title, number 12 for UConn,
Yep.
which is what she came to do all the way back when she
started.
first came in.
Yeah, for sure.
2019, so around COVID. Right, to end the title drought for UConn. At that time, it was 4
Right.
years where they won 4 in a row,
Yeah.
in 2012 to 2016 with Breanna Stewart.
Yeah.
But as we said there, South Carolina still hustling, still
going.
trying. Not really what the focus is at this point. Everyone's kind of watching the, emotional goodbye of the eventual number 1 draft pick. But, everyone can feel the title is about to be here. You could just
Right.
feel the kind of emotions, momentum building. You can literally see the band. They're giddy. They're jumping.
Yep.
They're excited. They're ready to
And
celebrate.
I mean, they're just
And then this is one of the tougher moments. Is there's exactly a 0.1 difference on shot and game clock. So you have to wait, and then you have to. They pass the ball back in here, and that's it. It's over.
that's it. Yep. Yeah.
82-59. But right, like we just were talking about, South Carolina cutting that lead, making it
Right.
respectful, showing their brand, showing their identity. That's important for recruiting. But two sides to sports, and it's the tough thing. And we talk through it a lot with our athletes. Someone
Yeah.
wins, someone loses.
loses.
UConn gets title number 12, which makes Gino the winningest coach in the history of college basketball.
Love to
Passes the legendary UCLA Bruins coach John Wooden, who only has 11. Gino now standing alone with title
Nice.
number 12.
see it. Yeah. But yeah, that's a nice way. Again, biased opinion, but I definitely like Paige and kind of what she represents and what she's done at UConn, and so it's great to see like that happy ending, fairy tale ending for her career in college, and excited to see what she goes on and does next too.
The presumptive number 1 draft pick for the WNBA. And as always, the really important thing with sports, at the end of the day, whether you win or lose, it's getting in that handshake line,
Yes.
showing good sportsmanship, something right we can influence and control out there as athletes, and something you definitely need to do. And
Right.
it's cool to always see this with both teams, because sometimes you see it throughout the season, not so much in the women's side of the game, but you see kind of these scuffs or scrums
Yeah.
or kind of tough moments. So
Right.
amazing job for UConn, cutting down the nets, one of 4 teams to win the title by beating 3 number 1 seeds. They were at number 2.
Wow. Yeah.
for
that's
those
awesome.
for those that care about their brackets.
Yes.
But yeah, final thoughts on the women's national championship game in Tampa.
No, I think it was definitely an exciting game, like going into it, like just having 2 just very strong teams going at it. And I think, like I said, like they both played as best they could that day, and UConn just kind of got that early motivation, that early lead, and they stuck with it. They didn't slow down with that lead, and all the way through till the end. South Carolina too, fighting all the way to the end. So a good show on both sides, and yeah, I thought it was a good game.
Yeah. My final thoughts on this was, UConn came in, they were hungry, they wanted it. Mm-hmm. They, showcased their resilience and toughness, as those players have been through a lot. It's not very often you have 3 number ones from prior classes all competing at the same time still. But UConn did, because 2 of their, Azzi Fudd and Paige Beckers, have gone through so many injuries. It's kind of, like you said, that nice storybook ending.
Yes.
That not every athlete gets sometimes.
Right. But yeah.
These teams will both be back. I think that if I had to guess, I would imagine this is probably the national championship game next year also, right? Yeah. So both programs will be back. It's about, how can you retool? And something we talked about on our last podcast episode is, right, how can you train and make sure that your off-season training is, motivating, right? Maybe UConn will have that, championship hangover effect. Mm-hmm. Maybe South Carolina is going to be hungrier because they want to go back and be back on top of that mountaintop. So.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. And what you do in the off-season to help prepare you for the next season is determines a lot for that attitude going in next year. So cool.
It's game 1. We'll get into, right? It's played on Sunday, and then we have the men's national championship game on Monday night as we get into that next. So
I know we both had Duke that we were hoping to kind of see in the final, but yeah, I think Florida and Houston. Yeah, both very accomplished, and I think this was something that I know I talked to you about, and I've talked to other people too, like going into this game, like, oh, who do you think is going to come out on top? Like, where are you thinking? And a lot of people just said, like, these are very, like, evenly good teams to play against each other. So that was definitely exciting going into this.
Yeah, you had the women's bracket, you had UCLA in the Final Four, Texas, South Carolina, and then number 2 seed UConn. For the second time ever in tournament history for the men's side, you had all 4 number 1 seeds. You don't usually get that much chalk in March Madness. Usually we want to see upsets. We want to see Cinderellas. There are no Cinderellas. There's only Titans. And you have these, titanic clashes in San Antonio for the men's Final Four. Mm-hmm. Florida got here by beating SEC rival Auburn and beating one of the, national player of the year contenders in Johni Broome. And then you had, Houston upsetting and, beating Duke after coming back in that crazy, 30 seconds that they had, right? 30 seconds in basketball, it's a long time, especially towards the end. It's not really 30 seconds, it's like 20 minutes.
Right.
But, they had a 6-point lead. They overcame that. I think when you look at the season for both these teams, these are the 2 most resilient teams, and then especially throughout this tournament, 2 very resilient teams, and we talk about that a lot with our athletes, how to build resilience, how to build that mental toughness, however you kind of want to use it or phrase it. Mm-hmm. And these are the 2 teams. These are the teams that I feel like, they got there for a reason. Florida has won a lot of close games. Houston has won a couple of close games in this tournament too. They've also dominated. They crushed. Mm-hmm. These are top 15 teams in offensive and defensive efficiency. You've seen all the things. The national champion is always ranked top 12 in week 6 of the AP poll. Who is going to do it? And we have the opening tip: Florida, Houston, national championship in San Antonio. And the fun thing, I think, to kind of first consider, as it hopefully will pan out here, is they play in a football stadium. This is basketball. Usually you're playing in a 20,000 seat arena. Yeah. This is a 65,000 seat arena, the Alamo Dome in San Antonio, right?
A little bit different feel there.
Way big of a different feel. Yeah. And it's something to really consider whenever you play anywhere, whenever you compete anywhere, is the environment in which you're competing in.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. I mean, it can make the whole experience feel like totally different, depending on how full the stadium is, how many people are there, how many eyes are watching, right? And just the noise in that stadium is different than previously where they've played. And so you have to almost, in that mental prep going into it, prepare yourself for that different feel and performing in in that stadium. So
Yeah, the really fascinating thing that you hear a lot now too with these players, as we kind of will once again talk through, because there's a lot of buckets that are about to be scored. We can't break down all of them. But Houston, right? Houston strikes first. As you see there on the screen, number one defense in Division I. Out of all 350 plus schools in Division I, this is the best defensive team.
Yeah.
And resilient also, because they had to overcome earlier this season. They started 4-3. They eventually, finished, I believe, 35-4 because they lost eventually in this one. Spoiler, but just a great back and forth. Not the prettiest of basketball you're going to see in this game. If you watched it, it wasn't very pretty, but the drama was there. It was this tough, amazing kind of battle. And, it's going to be a good back and forth. This is going to be, like I said, a titanic clash almost in ways, because you have two of these number ones that, deserve to be here, that have earned the right to be here, and just scrappy throughout.
Yep.
And something, as I always like to tell the athletes that I work with, especially for basketball players, is, you have to know and kind of feel your way into these games, especially at the start, like we kind of talked about with the women's game. Like, you have to kind of get a feel, but also, right, this play right here by Francis, his last name.
Me?
No. Yeah, because you could do this and dunk over.
Easy.
I believe 10 or half. Yeah, you could definitely, jump that high. He had more space to go. But, right, big play right there, right? Big energy play, big momentum play, and it's still just a close game, right? So this is something to really consider. I like to think with this whole idea of like managing your energy when you're out there, because you don't want to get too high right there. Maybe you let a little bit too much out, and then you might slack off defensively on the other end, or, it's still going to be a close game.
Right.
And that's something I always like to tell to athletes, like knowing going in, when you hopefully set goals for yourself before this game, like what you're looking to do or achieve, I always ask them, like, is this winnable? And then, if it's winnable, is it a blowout? Is it going to be close? Is it going to be a back and forth? And, you should know going into as a player in this one that it's going to probably be a close back and forth. It's going to be scrappy. You kept hearing it on the broadcast that you can't prepare for the way Houston plays defense. You can't simulate that in practice, which is a really tough thing, because a lot of players gain a lot of confidence from the preparation that they put in practice.
Right. Yeah. But yeah, just like the women, like it's just this close back and forth, and both teams are just trying to strong arm the other and trying to get that lead and trying to kind of keep that momentum rolling, keep that get that confidence through the game. In
this game, super, defensive, gritty first half. You should know as a basketball player, for the athletes out there, I always like to say, if you should never leave a game. I think you should always leave a game with at least 1 or 2 fouls, because you're trying to push the envelope, see what you can get away with. This half only had 4 fouls called, and I felt like I was watching like a boxing match or UFC. Like it was intense. These guys could get away with a lot. You saw a lot of pushing, shoving, arm bars. We'll get into the second half. There's a big difference in the way that the game was called, but you see there, Will Richard really keeping Florida in this game, but no one's really separating, right? Basketball is a game of runs. We saw in the women's national championship game, right? You kind of went on more of those runs, right? They stopped South Carolina from ever getting really on a run, whether it was, they scored 4 or 6 in a row. They usually found a way to stop it, but bodies on the floor.
Yeah.
This is a physical game.
This is a physical game.
And you have to know this. This is the gladiators going at each other in the Coliseum. You have the best player, first team All-America for Florida, Walter Clayton. 0 points, I believe, in the first half, or he didn't make a field goal at least. I think he might have had 1 point in the first half. But this is a gritty defensive battle and just shot clock violation, right?
Yeah.
A big thing in basketball, we didn't really see it as much in the women's game. You see it a lot more in the men's side, is the shot clock violations. They have 30 seconds, right? It's weird to think that the amount of numbers you have to keep track of as an athlete, right?
Yeah.
Not only the score, how much time's left in the quarter, but then you also have the shot clock.
Yeah.
Then the other little things, right? You have to bring over the ball, half court in a certain amount of time, right? So there's a lot of time within time components of this.
Yeah.
And it can get really jumbled around. And that's why usually, these shot clock violations happen, especially off of, inbounds, out of bounds. Did they reset the clock correctly? A lot of things to keep up with and keep track of. And that's where, these shot clock violations come in some of these times. But Florida hanging around, but just a good back and forth this entire kind of first half.
Yeah.
Blocked by Francis.
Man. I'm doing great out there.
dunk on the other end. And Houston's building this lead, right? It's gritty, it's back and forth. You got to use some of your fouls, but Florida still hanging in there, still fighting. Yeah.
Oh, dang.
Really good offense. Florida, one of the common big themes out of this was, throughout the tournament too, out of timeout plays, they were really good at. And it's a big thing in this sport, especially, most sports too, is using timeouts to quash any momentum or to kind of, reset and recenter yourself.
Right. That's definitely a strategy to the game. And you can tell the resilience that a team has by if that really breaks them or not, kind of getting that timeout call.
Yeah. So we're getting to the tail end, right? Once again, men's basketball is 40 minutes, but it's broken up into two 20-minute halves. And this is the really fascinating thing, right? Houston built this 9-point lead. Now it's only 3.
Yeah.
It's all about, right, these runs and maintaining yourself, but neither team panicking, right? This is usually what you see with these number one teams, and when they're both left like this, so you get these kind of amazing, kind of great back and forth type of game. But knowing that going in, like we talked about, is huge. Lots of blocking, lots of bodies on the floor once again, right? Tough to simulate sometimes these teams that you have to practice to work against. A block there, right? That could have been a huge, big momentum swing as we kind of start the second half.
Yeah.
But usually it didn't really show it here. There's I forget who they interviewed at halftime. Off the top of my head, I believe it was Juwan Roberts for Houston. He talked about them staying together, playing together as a team, and it's starting on the defensive end, right? Leaning into their identities as teams, I think, is something that a lot of, if you're a coach out there listening to this today, really try to make sure that you are leaning into what your identity is as a team, and make sure your players know what your identity is as a team, because sometimes they don't know, right? What's your philosophy as a coach? Are you more offensive or defensive minded or centric? Or do you, like to win games certain ways? How do you kind of, quantify those wins? Is it, for Houston, it starts on the defensive end. For Florida, it's transition. Everything goes through Walter Clayton, and then make sure the bigs are running to the rim.
Right.
So
but I know you mentioned this before too, about the types of training that each of these teams get, and I believe it's Houston that really prepares their players for the endurance part of the game.
Yeah, we could definitely talk about that. The crazy stat, which I saw in the Final Four, is like, I would have picked Houston, even though they, spoiler alert, didn't win the national championship. Their average mile time as a team, and as former runners, it's crazy. To actually hear if you run or know anything about running. We're saying it's crazy. It's crazy. Yeah. The average mile time of Houston and their off-season conditioning, like we just kind of talked about towards the tail end of the women's national championship game, right? What you put in the off-season, their off-season training is no joke. It's insane. It's ridiculous. Yeah. The practices are intense. Not to say that Florida's aren't too, but just watching the little clips and videos, the average mile time of Houston is 5:19. Right? Which is crazy. I wouldn't even run that in training. I wouldn't even dare to, like, when I'm out for a run, I'm not going 5 under 5:30 pace.
No,
it's wild. The fastest is 5:07 too. It's not like there's a person that can run a 4.5 minute mile out there. It's 5:07. The slowest is 5:45, and I think it might be that guy, whoever. He's like 6'9", 260. He's running a 5:45 mile. Yeah, that's also crazy, insane. That shouldn't be happening.
Crazy, and that's crazy to see, like other sports using running as training, but no, like that's insane. And obviously you can see the benefits from that type of training by how well these guys play through all 40 minutes of their game, like all the way through till the end. They have that same intensity, and it all trickles down to that training and that
the
identity
training they put in the off season, leaning into that identity. Florida's got them boys though over there, down in Gainesville. So this is why this is a back and forth game. And this is your last game of the season, right? You're gonna play all out. You're gonna go all out, but just a great back and forth. But once again, this is where maybe Houston will start to separate themselves. And can they get Walter Clayton going? And one of the big things that you see here from Walter Clayton, right? He was the guy that if everyone said if Florida was going to win the national title, he has to be the guy, right? He scored 34 points in the semifinal, I believe, against Auburn. He was the reason for the big, comeback against UConn in the round of 32 when they beat the two-time defending national champions, right? To be the champ, you got to beat the champs.
Yep.
That's what they did. And you have to try to get Walter Clayton going, but a message kind of for all athletes out there, depending on your sport a little bit too, was not shooting the ball great, was not finding his shot. A lot of that's to the, because of the Houston defense and the way that they, were guarding him. But he still found ways to be effective. He was passing. He had 7 assists to this point. I think he only had like 3 points. He's not going to score his first field goal until a little bit later on. We'll get there. But this is a big back and forth game. And sometimes, he didn't panic, right? You didn't see the panic from him. He wasn't putting up ill-advised shots. That can happen a lot sometimes. You maybe, if you're playing soccer, like I have 2 assists, but usually I'm the goal scorer. Why aren't I scoring goals? For basketball, why aren't I shooting well? For baseball, why aren't I getting hits? Right? There's other facets and components to the game, right? And if you can focus on those, that can usually build into build your confidence into the other aspects that might be lacking or not there that day.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. And that's something that we mentioned with the women's too. Like there's just so many things to focus on, so many things to worry about or just emphasize in your game. And if your shots are not there, there's so many other pieces to the game that are still going to make you effective and still make your team effective in the overall goal that you guys are trying to get to.
Screens, re-screens, not turning the ball over, boxing out, right? All big things in this sport. As you see there, LJ Cryer hits the 3, pushes the lead to 10. And then this is where, in my personal opinion, things started to get a little interesting in the way this game was being officiated. LJ Cryer, too, he had the chance because he won a national championship back in 2021 with Baylor. He had the chance to become the first player in Division I history to win a national title with 2 separate schools. Something I'm sure the way the transfer portal and NIL works now that we will see a little bit more of. Who will be eventually the first, because as we've already spoiled, Houston did not get it done on this day today. But they have built this 10-point lead, right? And if you're Houston, you want to keep going. You want to keep pushing it. If you're Florida, you want to try to kind of quash and stop that momentum, right? They still have both teams still have 3 timeouts left. But this is where, as you see there in the little box score, right, the fouls start to mount, right? Houston's already in the bonus, and Florida's going to start catching up. Officiating is something we don't have control over as athletes, right? Something I say to every single one of the ones I work with, right? We do this control exercise. What do you have control over? What can you influence? What don't you have control over? And you don't have control over the officiating. Don't blame it. You have to play through it. And that's why I said every basketball player should leave a game with 1 or 2 fouls to see what you're getting away with, what you can get away with in each half, because each half's going to be called a little bit different. Coaches went up to the refs, right, at halftime and said, I'm noticing this. I see this. They're doing this. And it's, that can influence, right? A coach can influence how these games maybe are going to be called by going up to the officials. The officials are going to be obviously influencing and controlling a little bit of this game as well. But Florida starts to hit shots and starts to kind of find their rhythm. And that's the big thing. A lot of times when it's this tough, gritty defensive game, it's hard to really find a rhythm. And the amazing concentration here by Tanner Howe to Allentown, PA, I believe. Right? Getting the block, running the floor, right? The hustle. You know that Houston's going to be right there. So you have to stay locked in. You have to stay focused. And that 12-point lead quickly evaporated. And now it's only a 3-point
back to that close back and forth game that was in the beginning. And you gotta prepare yourself for that, right? Like, just because at some point throughout the game, just because the other team starts getting the lead, you see in so many sports and so many case scenarios where just because somebody has the lead at some point doesn't guarantee them that win. Like as I said with the women too, you gotta fight all the way through to the finish, because we all know how this game turned out, right? And for a while there, it was looking like Houston was on a roll and had things almost in the bag, and how quickly it can change in a moment, and how quickly it could have changed going right back into Houston and having another, like,
you knew coming in this was going to be a close game.
Yeah.
And you built a 12-point lead, and that's all well and good. Keep building on that. Keep that confidence. But know that Florida is going to make their push. Know that this team is going to come. They're not just going to fade away. Don't get comfortable, right? Be comfortable with the uncomfortable pieces of this.
For sure.
But at the end of games, throughout the tournament, this is where a certain player, the only player, first player, not only, but the only player as of right now in Florida school history. They won back-to-back national titles. They have a bunch of NBA talent on those teams. This is the only player in Florida basketball history to be a first-team All-America. And Walter Clayton starts to come alive. This is where he knows he can come in confident. He knows this is his time. He has to put Florida on his back. It's no longer about passing. He drives down, gets, and starts getting tough buckets. And this is where, he loves this moment, right? Some players kind of can thrive and come alive in these clutch big moments. And he wants to be that clutch player. He wants to be the one with the ball in his hands. He gets to be the one with the ball in his hands because he's put in the work, and you've seen it throughout this tournament, which is, just a really big confidence piece, I think, for him. And confidence piece, is for Florida. One of the best things that the head coach of Florida did, he rested him. He made him sit, catch his breath, figure out, how to kind of approach and attack this defense too, which you don't see a lot of coaches do, especially, right? You don't see Todd Golden doing this a lot. He's doing the national championship. He's like, you need to sit, find out, rest, right? Something that we're going to be talking about in a little bit here when we talk on our next podcast about burnout, but rest, right? And in-game especially, getting that rest and kind of, our narrow focus that we have, kind of see a bigger picture. And that's what he's doing here. He can't hit the three. He can't find the three. Drive in the lane, get the tough bucket, get the and one. 90% free throw shooter. I'm pretty sure he's going to hit the and one here to tie the game. He does, but Houston still building the lead, right? That's what it's all about. Finding, cutting.
Yep.
Foul calls. Maybe that wouldn't be called in the first half the way it was called, but it is in the second. So you have to know that if you're Florida. You have to get these tough buckets. You have to get the tough boards. You have to push the pace, drive, kick, whatever it may be.
Yep.
But really amazing kind of basketball. This is where it was back and forth. This is where you can feel the drama building. And if you're a player, body's on the floor, but you have to start to slow it down. Relax here. Houston, to this point, right? Florida keeps coming back. If you look on this kind of score bug, Houston only has one timeout left. And if you know as a player, you can't afford to lose that timeout as a coach, right? Florida still has all three. A kind of nice little piece to know for both teams, because eventually we've seen it before happen in college basketball. I believe in a national championship game, the horrendous time where someone called a timeout and you have no timeouts left and you call a timeout in this sport, technical foul. And you give the other team's free throws and possession of the ball, and you kind of write it off. So important thing to know, right, at all times as a player sometimes, how many timeouts do we have? How many timeouts do we have in the back pocket?
Again, more numbers to keep in your head.
More numbers, right? This is a tough sport. You have time playing within time. You have a shot clock. You have a game clock. You have a score. You have timeouts you have to remember.
Yeah.
Right? So keeping things really simple, like we talked about for the women's game a little bit more, but setting the right goals for yourself. And you start to see here, right, is Florida going to finally come back and get the lead here? Can Houston keep up the lead? And finding your best players, right, in these big moments is what the commentators kept talking about. Go to those players that have gotten you all through this year. And here we see Florida's 2 timeouts because they just called one. And then once again, a beautiful out-of-bounds timeout play. Who hits the 3? Walter Clayton to tie the game. He loves these big moments. He came to play today. And this is where we start to see the wheels maybe fall off a little bit from Florida, from Houston a little bit here, right? And this is where, the really tough part, blocked. Florida's got to focus here, right? That was a block shot. There were 4 blue shirts there. Any one of them could have grabbed the rebound. This could be a make or break, do or die moment here with a minute and a half left in this game. And Houston, right, getting to LJ Cryer, trying to get to one of their best players. Maybe a poor play call, maybe a foul in there. But right, they're calling it how they're calling it in this half. And you have to play through that. And this is where Florida has the chance to take the lead in the national title game. At this point, they only had the lead for 17 seconds. Houston was leading a majority of the way.
Majority of the game, yeah.
But this is where that resilience,
That moment.
this is resilience, this is toughness. And we're getting to the moment that everyone has seen. a really big quick point, because we haven't talked about it a little bit. Free throw routines and routines in general, super important, right? You see these guys catching their breath, setting up, getting and finding their rhythm, because, free throws are the reason they're called free, because they're, free, they should be free points out there.
Right.
But Florida takes the lead, 46 and a half left in the national title game. Houston had one turnover the play before, and they're going to have another one off the leg of their point guard right there.
Yeah.
Right. And this is where it's tough. These moments are tough. They're reaching in, they're making the plays, right? And they're going to try to get the ball in. This is the Houston conditioning. They do. They get the ball to who? To Walter Clayton. And almost a really bad turnover, right? You can't rush. You have to try to
You gotta slow it down and
slow it down in these moments.
have
Even though
control.
it's trying to rush you with the time that's left on the clock. More free throws. Was it the officiating in the game? We'll never know. But this is where we get to play that everyone has seen. 65, 63, 17 seconds left. Houston is going to be playing for the last shot. Do they go for the tie? Do they go for the win in the national championship? They said they'll play here for Cryer. They get snuffed out. They get to Sharp. Pump fake. Walter Clayton comes out with a key, not even block, but a late contest. And this play, the diving on the ground for the national title, this is a thing that I saw throughout the game watching with Houston, is they do a drill where they literally throw a basketball and these players go and sprint after it. And the kind of irony you see here, like, this is the definition of their program and identity for Houston. Florida comes up with a late 50-50 ball, gets in the hands of who else? Walter Clayton, dribbles it out, and Florida are your 2025 men's national champions.
Crazy finish for that. But exciting for everybody watching, right?
Exciting, dramatic, but right, I think the biggest key takeaway that, we hadn't said at the start is, being mentally tough and fighting through the whole time.
Yeah, for sure. And also being able to understand how to handle pressure like that. And pressure doesn't always have to be a negative experience. It doesn't always have to be a negative thing. And it's something that a lot of athletes learn how to thrive in that type of pressure. And you really saw that in this game. So
Pressure is a privilege.
Mm-hmm.
That's I think the best way to phrase it. And here on Mental Breakdown, College Basketball Edition.
cool.
See you next time.
If you like what you're listening to, be sure to follow the Athlete Cafe on Instagram, TikTok, and YouTube. You can find us wherever you enjoy listening to your podcasts.